Welcome back everybody, my name is Tucker, and in today's video I am back over here on tiermaker and I'm going to be ranking something a little bit different today. In the past I've done NBA positions, and today I'm ranking the worst contracts in the NBA. You can see the categories that we have there on the left hand side. We have Chandler Parsons, awful, questionable, and not bad. So we got the worst contracts at the top and some ones that aren't so bad at the bottom. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload every single day. Okay, so a couple of things to keep in mind here before we get into it. Some of these are slightly outdated. You can see that Iguodala is still with the Warriors. You can see that Andrew Wiggins is still with the Timberwolves, but we can still grade those contracts based off of, when they were originally signed and how it's worked out since that contract was signed. And that's the other thing to keep in mind here is I'm not grading this off of right now. So for example, Gordon Hayward has like 1 year left on his contract, so it's not that big of a deal, but more so I'm grading when it was signed compared to how it actually worked out for the team or teams that held on to that contract during the time that it was active. So that's what we're going to be doing today. Let's go ahead and jump right into it, beginning with Otto Porter Jr. And this one might be a little bit surprising to some of you guys, but I'm only putting him in the questionable category. And you might think of this contract as one of the worst ones in the league over the last couple of years, but that's not really true because Otto Porter Jr. is a good player. Like, yes, he's been overpaid for years now, right? And it all started when the Nets offered him a huge contract in restricted free agency that the Wizards ended up matching just because they didn't want to lose a former number 3 overall pick just a handful of years into his career. And Otto Porter Jr. can defend, he can shoot, he can play make a little bit, he can work a little bit in the mid-range. He's not going to be an all-star caliber player, and yes, he's been overpaid, but this isn't nearly as bad as some of the contracts that we're going to talk about throughout this video. So he is only going in the questionable category. Next up now, Nicolas Batum, and he's going in the awful category. And you might be thinking, well, what's the difference there? I mean, Nick Batum has been a solid player as well. The availability has been an issue, and at the time that this happened, everybody knew that it was a bad idea, that they were gonna give Nicolas Batum essentially a max contract. They had just traded for him right before his contract was set to expire, and everybody knew that it was a bad idea for the Hornets to do it, and they did it anyway. And even if Nicolas Batum was healthy, he wouldn't have been worth the money that he was being paid. But over the last couple of years, he really hasn't played very much at all due to some injury issues and has turned into one of the worst contracts in the league over the last few seasons, and it is now going to be expiring here pretty soon. Not quite in the Chandler Parsons area for me because Batum has contributed at least a little bit, and it did at least make some sense at the time that it was signed, but that's where we're going to go with Nick Batum. Next up now, Russell Westbrook for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I didn't expect to see Westbrook here. I'm going in the category. I mean, I understand that you can talk about, does he actually help your team that much? Does he help your team win? Blah, blah, blah. There's all these negative arguments you can have about Russell Westbrook, but I mean, he's an all-NBA caliber player when he's right, when he's healthy. I'm not really worried about his contract. I don't want to spend too much time on that. Next up now, Lance Thomas. Again, there's one from every single NBA team here, so if you're kind of questioning why some guys are here and others aren't, that would be why. For Lance Thomas, I mean, yeah, he's been slightly overpaid. I think he's made like $8 million a year, but I'm really not worried about this contract. I'm more worried about some of the bigger ones we're going to talk about later in this video. Speaking of Timofey Mozgov, who signed, I believe, if I'm getting the numbers correctly, something in the like $18 million a year range with the Lakers. I think that was the summer that they brought in Luol Deng and Timofey Mozgov in the summer of 2016, and then they traded away D'Angelo Russell just to get rid of Timofey Mozgov's contract, which puts it, for me, in the awful category. Anytime you're giving up on a young asset like D'Angelo Russell, and yes, there were other circumstances around that trade, but they used Russell's value to get out from under Mozgov's contract. Anytime you're doing that, it's obviously not a good sign for your team moving forward, and so Mozgov is going to go in the awful category for me. Next up now, I honestly don't even know who this guy is. I'm just going to put him in the not bad category. I don't know who that is for the Sixers. Moving on now to Evan Turner. This is another one that we kind of knew at the time, right? Evan Turner bounced around to a couple of different teams after being the number 2 overall pick, had a nice stretch there in Boston, and earned, I think, a 4-year, $72 million contract to go play in Portland, has since been traded to Atlanta. This one, for me, is definitely going to go in the questionable category because Evan Turner has done some things for the Trailblazers. He can defend a little bit, but they should have known at the time that it wasn't going to work because the value that Turner provided in Boston was on-ball playmaking for the most part, and he obviously wasn't going to have the ball in his hands a ton there in Portland. And that's, when Turner's been at his best, he's been a guy either off the bench or starting that can create for you and then can also defend. And to bring him in and think he's going to be a good off-ball shooter, even though Portland has had a ton of success improving the jump shots of other players over the years, it never happened with Turner and turned into one of the worst contracts in the league over the last handful of seasons. Moving on now to Derek Favors. I'm not worried about Derek Favors' contract at all. It was a questionable fit at times there in Utah alongside Rudy Gobert, but just as a player in his contract, I'm not worried about it. Same thing with Andre Iguodala. Yes, he's getting older, but I'm cool with the contract that he had in Golden State. Isaac Bonga, I don't really know why he's on this list either. He's going to go in the not bad category. Serge Ibaka, I'm also going to go kind of here. Yeah, he's probably making too much money. I think around $20 million a year in the contract that he signed. But after, having a few injury issues there, he really stepped it up, was a pretty significant part of that Raptors championship team last year, so I'm not too worried about his contract. Mason Plumlee is an interesting one because I think you can make an argument that his contract is questionable when you're talking about not only a bench player, but a bench big. But Mason Plumlee's a good player. He can play make a little bit. He can definitely be a good defender, and I'm cool with his contract as well. Next up now, Patty Mills, another one, kind of like Mason Plumlee. As a good player, but is he worth the money that he's being paid? It's unlikely that he's worth the money that he's being paid, but I'm going to put him in the category as well. But now we're getting to a couple of bigger ones here. Kevin Love, Kent Bazemore, and then to a lesser extent, Harrison Barnes. The Kevin Love one, for me, is just an awful contract. And I think that Kevin Love can still be a good and productive player. But when the Cleveland Cavaliers offered this deal and Kevin Love signed it, it made almost zero sense. LeBron had just left. They decided to bring back Kevin Love on a 5-year deal, despite having the opportunity to trade him away and get some value out of him. He definitely would have been a tradable asset given the contract that he was already on, but he decided to give him a new 5-year deal, and now they're stuck with him. It's unlikely they're going to be able to get very much, if any, value out of him via trade, and it's definitely possible that he could just have some injury issues over the next couple of seasons and not really be an asset for this team at all. So that is going to go in the awful category. Next up now, Kent Bazemore. I'm gonna put him in the awful category as well because I think it was 4 years, 72. I think this was another summer of 2016 one, and he had some nice seasons in Atlanta, but now is pretty much just a rotation guy. And anytime you're paying a rotation player that much money, it's definitely not a good contract at all. Next up now, Harrison Barnes is another guy that's going to go in the questionable category. Same thing with Otto Porter Jr. Harrison Barnes got a bad rap when he left Golden State because of his poor performance in the finals. He basically wasn't being guarded on the perimeter, couldn't make shots, went to Dallas, got this huge deal, and people were thinking, why are they paying him that much? Harrison Barnes was good in Dallas and has been good in Sacramento as well. He's strong, he can defend, he's got versatility on both ends of the floor, he can score a little bit in the mid-range, can shoot from the outside. He's never going to be an all-star caliber player, and maybe, you're paying him like one, which is why this is going in the questionable category. But overall, it's not really a bad contract, or at least not as bad as you would think, because Harrison Barnes is actually a good player and can do some things. So Danilo Gallinari, I'm not worried about, is going to go in the category. I really don't know why Myles Turner is on here. He's making $20 million a year, and maybe you could say that's a slight overpay, but for someone that still has potential, is still young, and provides a relatively unique skill set as a shot blocker and someone that can stretch the floor, I'm not worried about his contract at all. Same thing with Spencer Dinwiddie. That one is just, again, I don't really know why it is on this list. And now we get to some tough ones. John Wall and Blake Griffin, for me, the conversation is, are you putting them in the awful category? Or are you putting them in the Chandler Parsons category? And it's tough because you can definitely defend these decisions at the time that they were made, right? So John Wall had just made a third-team All-NBA when he signed his new deal. And Blake Griffin was really good last year, and it's just the injury issues this year that have slowed him down. But if we're projecting this moving forward, the contracts that these players are on, I'm going to go awful for John Wall, and I'm going Chandler Parsons for Blake Griffin. I really think that we've seen the end of Blake Griffin as a quality player at all, based off everything that he did this season with the injury issues and everything. It's going to be one of the worst contracts in the league over the next couple of seasons, and the only reason that Wall isn't in that category is just because I think it's at least possible that he can be, a solid player returning from his Achilles injury, but still handful of years left on that deal, and it is going to be a very, very expensive one and prohibitive to the Wizards in terms of trying to rebuild or build anything there in Washington. Next up now, Andrew Wiggins. It's between awful and questionable for me. I'm gonna go awful just because I don't think he's as good of a player as Harrison Barnes and Otto Porter Jr. I do think it's close to him being questionable, and maybe in Golden State he'll turn that around and he won't be nearly as bad of a contract. They're still kind of in wait-and-see mode on that one. Tim Hardaway Jr., I'm going questionable, and here's why. So the Knicks, if I'm remembering this correctly, the Knicks had Tim Hardaway Jr., then he went to Atlanta, then they signed him again in free agency. I think it was 4 years, 72. And he's a solid player, but he's not worth 18, 19, $20 million a year. And so that is definitely a questionable contract for me. Good player, not worth what he's being paid. Now we get to what I think is probably the toughest one in the entire video. And it's Gordon Hayward. And it's between awful and questionable. I don't want to, but I kind of think he has to go in the awful category. When you're considering a guy making over $30 million a year and is kind of like a fringe starter, depending on, you know, where he's at night to night. And obviously it's because of the injury stuff, and it's been a really tough thing for him to come back from, and I don't blame him for that at all. But just if we're evaluating the contract compared to the value, I think it has to go in the awful category. Next up now, James Johnson, another questionable one. The Heat went on that nice run a couple years ago where they ended up, you know, going 30-10 or something in the second half of the season. They paid a lot of guys. James Johnson was one of those guys, and is definitely not worth that deal. Same thing for Tony Snell, solid player but making too much money. Chandler Parsons gets his own category, so I think it's pretty obvious where Chandler Parsons is going to end up. Jrue Holiday is a really, really good player. I'm not worried about what he's being paid at all. Again, I don't know why he is on here. Tyler Johnson now definitely... I'm going awful here because everybody knew that you shouldn't pay Tyler Johnson what he was being paid. The Nets, again, are responsible for a huge contract on this list because they offered him a big contract in restricted free agency. The Heat ended up matching it, and then he moved on to the Suns. Solid player, but not worth $20+ million. And now we get to Chris Paul. And Chris Paul showed himself to still be an all-NBA caliber player this season, and a player that in certain situations could still be worth, you know, at least a little bit close to what he's being paid. When you're talking about the age, the length of the contract still, and the value on it, that has to, I think it has to go in the questionable category, right? Because I put Russell Westbrook in the category only because you know, he's not as old as Chris Paul and still a really productive player. Paul is still really productive, but it's always possible that, you know, next year the age catches up to him and he's just not nearly as productive. He has some injury issues and he's still being paid $40+ million a year, and that is a huge issue as a contract. But there you have it, ranking the worst contracts in the NBA. Some of these, it was a little bit weird that they were even on the list, but others definitely required a good amount of thought, like the Blake Griffin thing, the Gordon Hayward thing, John Wall, even Andrew Wiggins. You kind of have to put some thought into where you actually would rank these contracts. And as always, I'm interested to see what you guys have to say down in the comment section below about where you would rank each one of these contracts. But as I said, that is going to be the end of today's video, and I thank you all very much for watching. Once again, my name is Tucker. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.